Yo, what's up, Austin? How are you, man? Do you hear me
Hey,
okay?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Dude, I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us, man. I know you're super busy, so
Yeah, of course.
yeah. So I guess I know we only have you for a limited amount of time here, so I'm just gonna get right into the questions if that's okay with you.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hell yeah, man. So the first question I have for you is: I noticed Solana's Twitter bio says that it's a blockchain built for mass adoption. Can you kind of share why Solana is better positioned to be adopted globally versus other blockchains?
Yeah, so the idea of building for mass adoption means that you're building with things like scalability to the core thesis of the chain in mind. So there's a lot of awesome blockchains out there, but like Bitcoin is a network, for example, that was not built for scalability. It was not built for mass adoption. It was built to be one thing and to do that one thing extremely well. So one of the core values that, when any of the core engineers are building something on Solana and thinking about what the future of the protocol direction is how can we keep fees as low as possible? And how can we keep as many transactions flowing through the network as possible? And so this means concepts like protocol revenue are just not something that are prioritized on the network because, protocol revenue is fundamentally a tax on users who are using the blockchain. And so all these innovations that are being brought to the network, the goal is to make transactions cheaper and increase the pool of transactions that people can actually use. So all those things kind of combine to make a network that is built for mass adoption. And that's kind of one of the main guiding principles there.
Yeah, 100%. That makes sense. I know a lot of people love Solana for the reasons that you just listed there. ETH can be a little pricey, depending on the day. So I definitely love that. And also, congratulations. I saw you recently fully stepped into head of strategy at Solana. What will you
Yes.
be focusing on, and how does this kind of change your day-to-day life? And really, what does the
Yeah.
day-to-day life of head of strategy at Solana even look like?
Yeah, well, thankfully, it means not running all of comms and marketing anymore. So that's awesome. We've hired two incredible folks to be stepping in as a VP of marketing and a head of communications. So I'm very excited to get them sort of ramped up over the next few months. So it'll be a transition process in that. But my work as head of strategy is really focused on what are the opportunities available to the Solana community and the network. What types of technologies do we need to be investing in and exploring? What kinds of projects do we need to be funding through grants to sort of set a pathway for what that might look like in the future? A lot of that work includes advocacy work, both our policy team, Amira, who runs is our head of policy, she's on my team, and so some of that's DC related, some of that's EU related. And then, also just speaking about the network in general at conferences and other public appearances. I'm still, taking the lead in organizing Breakpoint this year, our big annual conference. But then other special projects sort of as they come up. So, Helium and Render are two major projects that have just announced migrations and expansions to Solana. Those are, things that are multi-month long processes to get those engineering teams, comfortable and educated on the process of switching to a new blockchain. And a lot of that work is stuff I've been doing for a while. And so this gives me sort of more leeway and ability to go out and do that work and not have it be at the detriment of things like comms and marketing.
100%. And how would you notice like the difference between like doing that job today versus maybe like last year or the year before when we had a little more euphoria in the market? Like how has your role kind of shifted over time?
So the euphoria is kind of an interesting way to think about it because, in some ways, the job is actually no different whether we're in a bear or a bull market cycle. I think it's largely the sentiment of the people you're talking with that sort of changes. In a bull market, like it's obviously a lot of fun, folks are making a lot of money, like there's a lot of good things going on, but there's just a lot of crap that's out there, right? And so what we generally see is that in a bull market, it is much harder to find the signal through the noise. And in a bear market, it's much easier to find the signal because there's significantly less noise. And that's really great, right? Like from a perspective of doing my job, the best place to be is in between a bear and a bull for my job. And the work I do. It's the easiest time to do good work. Right now the problem largely is that a lot of companies that started doing experimentation in Web3 not even due to crypto, but due to their own like publicly traded stock price. They're like, oh man, we really need revenue, right? So you saw like Meta canceled their Web3 plans for Instagram and sort of rolled all that stuff back. And that's really unfortunate to see. So those types of conversations are harder in a bear. At the same time, like there's folks building light clients now. And like no one's building a light client in a bull market because they want to, they want to see if they can do something that's going to be in their own self-interest and make the money. And I think in the bear market, folks kind of come back to some of their sort of engineering principles and the ideas of like, we're not in blockchain to make money. We're in blockchain because we believe in self-sovereignty. We believe in sort of the First Amendment. We believe that people who should be allowed to own their assets and should be able to publish code. And, the money boys get flushed out a little bit every bear market.
100%. Shitcoin season brought a few of them back.
Yes.
But definitely 100% aligned with that. It's good to see that the real people are here still building products, even though a lot of the moon boys have left. You did mention Breakpoint. I know that's in a few months. Like, is there any alpha you can share about that? I know Amsterdam seems like a lit place to host a crypto conference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited. So Lisbon we picked in 2021 largely because we had to sign contracts in like April. And it was the only place that looked like it was going to be sufficiently open from a COVID policy perspective that we could actually have a conference where we had a few thousand people come. Lisbon was awesome last year as well, but one of the compromises with Lisbon is we have to do a distributed conference. And so we have three or four venues, but they can be 20 minutes apart. And so what we've been able to find in Amsterdam is an amazing campus where we can actually have like 5 to 7 stages going on at the same time. We can support up to 5,000 people, and it's all going to be in one place. And I'm really excited about that. I think, like, from my perspective as someone who's sort of on the organizing group for that, it's much easier. I don't have to run around from venue to venue, but also just from an audience perspective. Like, if you're an attendee, um, it's going to be much easier to go from stage to stage. And that also means that we can do a lot of smaller things that we weren't able to before. So there's a little bit more of a focus this year on, I mean, look, first and foremost, Breakpoint is a developer conference for developers. However, that doesn't mean we're not bringing a bunch of creators and artists. And so this year, what you'll see a few more creators and artists coming through. And, those are not going to be necessarily like massive main stage talks. Some of them might be, but it's going to be room for, NFT showcases. It's going to be room for workshops and these sort of smaller conversations about how to do stuff. And a lot of the sort of side events around Breakpoint, we're going to be able to bring directly to the campus. So that, for me, that is one of the coolest pieces about going to Amsterdam.
I love that. And I'm sure like all the conferences that you've attended, you kind of saw what you liked, saw what you didn't like. So it probably helps you guys put on a better conference. Is that correct?
It does. I have to say, I'm very disappointed with the blockchain conference world in general. I wish someone would do a super solid, good multi-chain conference. We haven't seen one yet, and so it's kind of weird to say that Breakpoint is a multi-chain conference because it's not. It's a Solana focused conference, but we try and bring some of the smartest people from other ecosystems who are building other things that I think developers on Solana could learn from. So like we had like Torgal. Well, we tried to have Torgal from Scroll. At Breakpoint last year. We have a bunch of folks who work cross-chain ecosystems, like Zaki's coming this year. All of these sort of ideas about like we really want to take the best ideas in blockchain and convene them together in a conference that, yes, is primarily focused on Solana, but Solana is an execution layer blockchain. Like, our sort of goal and vision for this too is like if you want to have your Bored Ape Yacht Club on Ethereum, that's awesome. But when you launch ApeCoin, you really should do it on Solana so your users aren't paying $3,000 in gas fees to claim their airdrop. And then they can bridge them over if they want later. But like it's an execution layer play at the end of the day. And so what that means is that we want folks across multiple ecosystems touching and interacting with Solana when it makes sense for the products they're building.
100%. That does make sense. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Solana community, man. Like you guys are, bull market, bear market, doesn't matter. You guys are always showing out on Twitter. So you guys definitely did a good job kind of creating that. I do kind of want to ask you as well. I saw like one of your recent tweets on 420, actually. You said you'd love to talk to some reporters about increasing their knowledge on how blockchains work. Have any actually reached out
A
to you?
few have, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to go into details because part of that whole thing was it's confidential. But I think one of the biggest challenges in crypto is that we've taken a lot of people who are financial and markets reporters and we've told them to go cover crypto. And crypto is fundamentally a technology. It's like the market structure of crypto is the most boring part of crypto. And so we get a lot of people who are doing their damnedest to cover this industry and to really understand what's going on. But instead, they just write like Solana is up 10% today. ETH is up 10% today. Like, it's a lot of like churn and horse race instead of the worst parts of political reporting are now coming into crypto reporting. And so what I would really love to see is that we're bringing kind of a bit more. thoughtfulness and a focus on the technology and the technology's outcomes to the networks. Like, imagine if someone covered like the social media world by just looking at the revenue that each of these different social media platforms was bringing in. Like, if all the reporting on YouTube was like how much money creators were making or losing on YouTube, like we wouldn't really have a sense of what that platform was doing and its important role in shaping the lives of creators and giving people incomes, right? So it's just kind of one of these things where it's like I hope more folks reach out to us. We're doing more proactive work too. I mean, I do this every few months. I go around and like talk to a bunch of the newsrooms and sort of like, just be like, what questions do you have about Solana and crypto in general? But this is one of the hard pieces about our industry too, is it's so young that we don't have like industry groups, right? And there's so much competition between blockchains, which I think is largely a little bit silly. Um, but that's what happens when you give people tokens that are worth money, is that they factionize themselves. But we don't have good industry groups that are sort of out there advocating for the concept of blockchain. Like, the world's most successful industry groups are banking, defense, and oil. And if we can be even a tenth as good as any of those industry groups, we're going to take over the world.
Oh yeah, man, that's what we like to hear. I mean, so obviously traditional, media doesn't really do great coverage of crypto, but are there any like native crypto publications that you're a fan of or you consume regularly?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the problem with reporting is that they're asked to do a ton of work in a very short period of time. So, like, I think the block does a really good job. I think CoinDesk actually does a pretty good job too. Decrypt does a good job, but all these places also mess up routinely too. And this is kind of one of the challenges of like, look, I used to be a journalist, right? I started my career in journalism. I worked for, the NPR system for about a year and a half. I worked for the Boston Globe, and then moved over into startups. This is back in like 2016. So I have a lot of like respect and understanding for the difficulty of doing reporting fast. But like at the same time, I'm really worried right now that with the place DCG is in, is CoinDesk going to get sold off to someone and basically turned into a content marketing farm? That would be really bad. I think we need better reporting in this space. And, one of the things that I would love to see is if there is something where, the CoinDesk newsroom ends up coming up for sale, like maybe there's a coalition of folks in the crypto space that actually buy the thing and turn it into a nonprofit newsroom. I think that'd be really cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting that you were a reporter, or a journalist. Sorry. So I'm kind of curious, like, why do the media, like, why do they keep fumbling the bag on coverage? Like, I know this, like, there's a speed component, but don't you think they lose credibility over time, like releasing stories that they know nothing about?
So I think I have more. So one of the things you have to remember is that it's not like folks in the crypto industry, when it comes to their engagement with press, are necessarily good actors either. A lot of the difficulty with this stuff comes from the fact that a lot of blockchains, layer ones, layer twos, dApps, put out press releases that are kind of full of crap, right? They put out an announcement that says we're doing this thing, and in reality, they've announced like a partnership to maybe do something in the future, or they've announced a roadmap for a technology plan, or they've announced a theoretical TPS number that no one has been able to get outside of a laboratory benchmark, right? And like, there's pieces where Solana's guilty of this too, right? Like Kevin Bowers, at the Fire Dancer demo at Breakpoint was talking about how it can dedupe 1.2 million transactions per second. And that kind of got like fuzzed by the community into saying Fire Dancer can do 1.2 million transactions per second, which it can't do, right? This was just a benchmark in a testing environment. And in the real world, we'll see massive performance increases, but we're not going to see 1.2 million transactions per second anytime soon on Solana. But like, so this kind of goes both ways, where like no one gives the protocols crap. Like, how many versions of ETH2 were there between like 2018 and 2022? There were probably at least 40 different technical roadmaps released. And there's nothing wrong with that. But like, that stuff will get picked up and turned into something that feels like this is what's going on. And so I think some of the blame is with blockchain technology companies too for running ahead of where the actual tech is very often on this stuff. And it's great to talk about the future, but like, so how often have you heard the sort of idea of like, oh, we're gonna do this and this and this, and then there's some stuff in the middle, and then like we take over the world. And like that hand wavy bit in the middle where then some stuff happens, like that's actually the most important part. Like inventing zero knowledge proofs is very interesting and difficult, but it took years to productize that technology into something that's remotely ready for mainstream. And most zero knowledge systems today are barely ready for mainstream. They have no decentralization, and that's fine, right? But like we talk about these things like they're, the second coming. And so, from a press perspective, like I get why sometimes they're frustrated with this industry because it has a habit of inflating its own accomplishments. At the same time, they downplay a lot of the really important work we do. So I just think it's more communication needed on both sides, and less of a willingness by the holders of all these tokens to sort of go along with the hype for hype's sake.
Yeah, this industry loves announcing announcements.
Yes.
So that's like our go-to bread and butter, man. We got to get those retweets and likes, So
Yeah, we gotta burn that stuff out. It's not gonna work over the long term. When was the last time you heard like a massive company pre-announce a pre-announcement? Like it just loses credibility.
yeah, that's I'm sure that as the space matures, that we'll see less of that over time, which is
Yes.
I'm kind of sure you've already noticed like we've seen similar paths here.
Yeah.
I also again I interesting question for you. I saw again you told a story on Twitter the other day about when you were 15, you downloaded the Apple software onto the Dell computer and drove some Apple engineers crazy.
Yeah.
Were you all into tech, and like did crypto and Web3 come pretty naturally to you?
Yes and no. So I've always sort of had like a part of me that's like super into humanities and like, I was a government major and like and political science undergraduate and stuff. And the tech stuff has always felt something for me that like makes a lot of sense, but I was often not intellectually curious about it just for the sake of the technology to sort of devote myself fully to it. And part of what I love about blockchain is as much as everyone is like, oh, it's all about technology, like blockchain is as much about human coordination and social systems as it is about technological systems. And so for me, this is like the perfect industry to work in because you get to deal with all the messy human side of governance about like how do we get decentralization and what is governance proposals and how do they like there's a lot of actual human stuff involved in making blockchains work. At the same time, like it's very cool cutting edge technology. And so for me, this is kind of like one of the coolest places to work. I've said this before, but it's basically like Solana or SpaceX. Like those are the two places I would like to work.
Without a doubt, man. I mean, both very innovative companies or organizations, if you will. I mean, what Solana's done is kind of insane. Like, I kind of have a question about your community as well. I mean, it's like you guys have been around for a long time, for a relatively
Sort
long time
of.
compared to other products. Yeah, we're relatively, like how products are.
Yeah.
Like, man, they're here one day, they're gone next. So if you made it a month, you're crushing it out here. But like, even in the bear market with like minimal interest in NFTs, Solana NFTs have crossed like 10 million in daily volume. Like, what is the secret to keeping your community engaged like during all cycles of the market? And how did Solana's community become so active when many other communities like fizzled out over time?
Yeah, the secret is that we don't run the community. The community runs itself. I think that there's a magic to escape velocity, right? And it's like you can't put the Solana community back in the bag. Like if we were sort of like, all right, guys, like we need you to be quieter for the next, for the good of the industry, no tweeting for the next month. That would not happen, right? That's totally impossible. And so one of the coolest things about this community is that it's totally superseded anyone at the foundation or labs at this point. And this is what success looks like, right? The reason that Ethereum is what it is today is because they were able to build a community that was super resilient and kind of didn't care about what Vitalik and Joe Lubin and all those folks were doing and wanted to do. It was a bunch of folks who were like, I believe in this technology. I'm going to build stuff on this technology. And I care about this technology, even when there's no profit motivation behind it. Remember, Ethereum was basically worthless for the first few years, right? So this is kind of the magic, I think, of Solana is that it's a community of folks who are not here for the money. They don't mind the money, right? No one minds making money. But like at the end of the day, they believe in this technology and they want to be parts of these communities. And so the NFT community is a community. Like there are daily and weekly Twitter spaces where people just go and hang out and like they're sort of talking about NFTs, but they're sort of just talking about their lives. They're sort of like it's kind of like a social club at this point. It's super interesting to see these sort of like all of these ideas that Web 2 tried to build out, that a Facebook group was supposed to be, that House Party was supposed to be, that, all this stuff, like it kind of all has come true in Web 3. And you're seeing a really good expression of that through these like very self-organized, Discord groups and Twitter spaces and stuff. So I think it's very cool. But I don't really have an answer for you about like how this happened. It just kind of happened.
Yeah, I feel like the people who try really hard and like build a dope community, like they kind of just like maybe aren't able to execute. But you guys were like, hey, like we're gonna let the work talk for themselves. Like we're gonna let the community kind of like do its own thing, and it just kind of like harnessed, man. Like the Solana community is insane. Like
Yeah.
one of the most active is on Twitter. Like it's actually kind of crazy. Like I'm sure you guys are a blueprint for other organizations to be like, okay, like how do we get a community like Solana? And a lot of you guys, even that I've talked to, like the influencers or builders, like really really cool, down to earth people. So
Yeah,
yeah, you guys are.
I would say one of the problems a lot of folks make is they try and pay their community. Like they start off with this sort of financial engagement piece. And I just think it sets folks off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably right as well. I mean, like I said, I don't know how you guys did it, but congratulations, absolutely crushing it. I also kind of about your environmental work. Solana's done a significant amount of that. Considering like the anti-crypto army frequently discusses crypto's environmental impact, do you think having a green strategy helps with mainstream adoption?
It in a bear, no. In a bull, yes. Um, so one of the things that's really interesting here uh, is that the environmental piece is like it really matters to some people, and some people think it's just like crap. And the people who think it's crap, like you kind of got to ignore because like they're welcome to their opinions, but like it matters to other people. And part of being a network that's meant to service everyone is this sort of idea that we're open to everyone and we have to support everyone's values through this thing. And so, from an environmental standpoint, it's a side effect, right? Solana is built to be as high performant as possible. And when you build incredibly high performance systems, they also become incredibly energy efficient. And that's one of the sort of keys here about Solana is the energy efficiency is intentional, but the greenness is sort of accidental from that perspective. Now, we've taken that and we've built on it. We've done all sorts of other things. Like we're doing carbon offsets for the entire network, and then we're doing actually on-chain carbon credits nowadays. So there's a bunch of really cool stuff getting built out there. But like, I do think that when a big enterprise is, especially a publicly traded company, is doing diligence on what blockchain to build on, there is an ESG checkbox somewhere. And if you can't provide an answer to that ESG checkbox, it's going to be a flag somewhere in one of the meetings in a VP or, executive level. And so, Solana being the most environmentally friendly blockchain per transaction is really important to folks.
Yeah, I would definitely 100% agree with that. And, again, leading the way as usual, not surprised. What do you guys kind of think about, like, we're seeing politicians literally run on building an anti-crypto army. Like, we won't mention any names.
You can
But yeah,
talk about
what do you
Warren.
kind of, yeah, yeah, right. That shit's kind of crazy, man. Like, it's like, I don't know. Like, we've done a lot of work. Like, there obviously have been some monumental fuck ups in the industry. But are you kind of still surprised to see, like, such large, like, anti-crypto sentiment coming from leadership in America?
I'm not. And I'm not for two reasons. One, this is pretty typical. It's pretty typical that we see a bit of a cycle where folks don't understand a technology, they see a fear of a technology, there's an overreaction from politicians who don't understand a technology, and then we kind of get back to somewhere that's a bit better. I think we're, this a lot of the way that the crypto industry is engaging with DC is super counterproductive, right? Where they're sort of staging protests and they're making big statements and like, I think some of the work that folks like Coin Center is doing is really important in this space. But, at the end of the day, um, you have to talk to DC if you want to help them write policy. And if we don't write, and this is, if we don't help them write policy, the policy is going to be worse. And so I think there's a really credible argument that blockchain should not be seen as a financial transaction network. It should be seen as a base layer neutral communications platform. Fundamentally, there's no difference between sending a transaction on Ethereum and using Verizon as your ISP to access the internet, right? If if I have a Verizon internet connection and I go do something illegal on the internet, Verizon is not liable. And Solana or Ethereum should also not be liable for transactions that occur on the network that may have, illicit components to them. And this is where, like, we can get into sort of semantics around stuff like the Tornado Cash sanctions, but like fundamentally, the base neutral layer of blockchain is probably better regulated under a communications technology framework, the way the internet is, as opposed to a license model, the way that anything that requires a money transfer license is. There's some stuff in the Warren Marshall bill that would be incredibly detrimental to blockchain, and would force a lot more off the United States. Now, what does this mean? Like, this might mean that DeFi has to be KYC'd, right? If you want it in the United States. But DeFi is an application layer built on top of the blockchain, and that's a different fight, and it's an important fight to have. But if we don't win this base layer neutrality fight to get people to understand that this technology is no more a financial base layer transaction technology than the internet is. 99.9% of the stuff that moves across the internet is financialized. It's no different than blockchain from a communications medium perspective. And so I think that's the biggest stuff to really watch out for, at least in my view. That's where I'm spending a lot of time focusing on.
Yeah, you're probably on the right track. And I'm curious, like, will Solana continue to expand its presence and influence domestically, or are you kind of planning for a future without U.S. markets?
I mean, we still see some of the most experienced teams being founded in the United States. We still see a lot too, though. So I think we don't really have a view of how this is going to play out, but we are prepared for it to play out multiple ways, is I guess the thing I would say. And this is kind of the way the foundation tries to do stuff in general, is like we try not to assume, we try to instead plot out several courses of actions based on the directions of things that we see. I mean, one of the biggest things I think is funny is like there's a bunch of foundations out there that like have a VC investment arm that's meant to be like a for-profit revenue generating VC arm. The Solana Foundation can now do investments, but those investments are not really meant to generate money. They're sort of meant for other functions and reasons. And any profits do roll back directly into the grants pool. But like, I don't think we would be particularly good at investing for profit, even if we tried to. I think that like the power of the foundation is its ability to look at a bunch of signals coming in from across the ecosystem and, spin up new tooling and infrastructure to support something like that. That's a very different skill set than sort of being able to predict what the future is. It's more about being a fast supporter of trends we are already seeing.
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of the space struggles to invest for profit, sir. You guys aren't alone in that.
Yeah.
It's tough here. But I also want to ask. I know we only have a few minutes here. I have to ask you about the phone. I mean, Solana is like also selling phones. Why launch a mobile phone, and what's the end goal with the saga? And obviously, congratulations on selling out your first batch. Like that was super dope to see.
Yeah, thanks. So Solana Mobile is actually its own company and sort of a project attached to labs, not the foundation, but I can still talk about a bunch of the stuff going on there. So uh, the phone is not necessarily meant to sell 100 million phones. The software that runs on it, the Solana mobile stack, is an open source Web3 stack that runs alongside full Google Android with Google Maps and Google Play Store and all the stuff you know and love. And it's really designed to bring Web3 as a first party citizen onto Android devices. And so our hope here is that the Solana mobile stack and the phone make enough noise that the folks who are building, Android, the folks that are at Huawei, at Samsung, at all these different manufacturers of phones all around the world, in the sort of $200 phone market in India, they start to see this as something that users are demanding and can be a differentiator to help them sell more phones, right? If you're selling a $200 phone in India and you can increase your sales by 5% by adding an open source software stack that supports Solana stuff to it, that's an easy win, right? Because that market is cutthroat. And so, all that kind of stuff comes together to really say like this is more of a beachhead product. Like when Microsoft launched the Surface line of computers like a decade ago, like all the Windows computers were terrible relative to Macs. And Microsoft was trying to show the Windows PC industry that if they built beautiful computers, people would buy them. And they were right. And so now you can get a Dell that's just as good as an Apple computer, at least from a build quality perspective. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here with the mobile phone.
Yeah, man, it's super innovative. It's awesome to see. I like when projects are like try to do different things versus try and like do the copy pasta that everybody else does in this case.
Yes.
Um, so good for you guys. And just let me know whenever you got to run. Like I know
Yeah,
you're on
I
tight.
gotta wrap up. I can do one more question.
Okay, great. I got one more good one for you. I know you've recorded a ton of episodes of the Validated podcast. Do you have a favorite one? And what have you learned most about having like so many conversations with people who are actually building in Web3 and crypto?
This podcast is an absolute joy for me to run. I have so much fun doing this thing, and I hope it's useful to other folks too. The most recent episode I'm going to give a plug for because it's all about sort of the policy and politics changes going on in DC. Amira co-hosts it with me, but we talked to two former OFAC lawyers about sort of how the government thinks about crypto regulation broadly. Going to make a lot of people angry, but it's a very informative episode for actually seeing how government agencies are viewing this technology nowadays, which is super cool. The other one is an interview with a musician called Black Dave, who's actually building largely on Ethereum, but it's all about how musicians can bypass Web 2 entirely and go directly into Web 3. And his journey into Web 3 through sort of like Atlanta hip hop and a bunch of stuff like that. It's very cool. I think it's kind of a real model for like so much of the quote unquote creator economy and NFTs is just like people launching PFP collections and seeing like a musician who's like got a very interdisciplinary approach to how his stuff rolls out across multiple blockchains and multiple channels in Web3. Really interesting to me.
Yeah, I love that, man. I mean, you've recorded a ton of episodes too. That's what I was noticing when I was like building these questions. Like, holy shit! Like,
Yeah, we're doing it
most
weekly.
pod.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's, and I'm telling you, like, we're trying to replicate that same consistency because most podcasts or whatever don't even make it past episode 10. I think you guys are on like I don't know 80, 90. How many episodes have you
Well,
done?
we picked up the old Solana podcast feed. So we've actually probably done about 12, 15 this year so far, which is pretty good.
Gotcha. Hell yeah, man. Look, I love that. Keep crushing out there. We appreciate your time. And I know you're super busy. Everybody make sure you tune into the Validated podcast. Absolutely dope as fuck. And Austin, look, we appreciate your time, man. Giving us a little alpha on Solana and giving the perspective is always
Yeah,
appreciated.
certainly. Thanks. This
Awesome.
was fun.
Yes, sir. I'll catch you around at Austin, man. Maybe we'll see you walking around.
Perfect. Thanks. Bye.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Andrew, what's up, man? How we doing?
GM.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Andrew is our new chief marketing officer at Hashflow. So very exciting, sir. So I kind of want to ask you as well. I got a couple questions for you here. You have a non-traditional background. I know you've worked across like entertainment, media, tech, and marketing. But was this by chance? Can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think for me at an early age, I had a bit of that like entrepreneurial bug, right? I didn't want to work for someone else. I wanted to kind of dictate my own future. And so, part of that I think was going into Hollywood, which back in the day, and this is like pre Entourage. I mean, the three paths that you'd go down were, lawyer, manager, agent. And I think, for me, like agent was the one that spoke to me because, it was fast paced, it was very deal making. And I think what was interesting is when I got into Hollywood, and this is, close to 20 years ago, these were the early days. I mean, this is before, tech started infiltrating. This is before celebrities were on social. I think even a lot of the social platforms, we think of today didn't even exist. And so, I saw this opportunity very early on to basically start my own department and be the bridge between, basically Madison and Vine and Hollywood. And then I think as a result of that, started to kind of dive deeper into tech, started to build relationships, in Silicon Valley in the early days, and started to really onboard a lot of celebrities. So, it's funny when I think about the whole kind of $8 check mark drama. I go back because I look at like how many celebrities I literally brought onto Twitter back in the day. And part of me wants to text them and say, like, guys, pony up the $8 because this actually impacts, you ending up in movies or you ending up in TV shows. But I think, in general, I mean, I've always kind of played a little bit of this like bridge role between worlds. And so, back in my CAA days, I was kind of a bridge between, Hollywood and brands. Then it was Hollywood brands and technology. Then I actually went to New York to build NBC Universal's first in-house marketing agency. And at the time, this is when all the media companies were trying to build in-house agencies. Ours was very, very successful. I mean, we did over $1 billion in revenue, I think, in our first year, which was more than two of the networks combined at the time. But again, like that was really building that bridge, right? It was, here's two different worlds that speak two different languages. How do you connect them together? And so I think, just kind of going back to the original question, like it really wasn't by chance. I mean, a lot of this has basically been, seeing where the puck is going, trying to build those bridges, trying to act as a translator. And then I think where the magic happens is, I refer to this a lot as like associational thinking. So, when I went to Amazon, pre-Arbitrum, my role was to basically build, some of our future marketing practices. Like how do we effectively advertise on podcasts? Netflix doesn't have advertising space. How do we bring our brand to Netflix in meaningful ways? And these are things that I've been doing, for a long time, but I think like no one had ever been able to prove the model or prove the measurement. And so, part of what was exciting at Amazon was, we will give you a team of data scientists, abroad. We will give you unlimited resources, try to crack the code on some of these things. And we did. And so I think, in general, like just to kind of sum it up, I've kind of played across all four of these worlds because I think that all four of these worlds are much more interconnected than the average person does. And so I find a lot of, candidly personal joy and fulfillment in trying to do things that folks haven't done before, or trying to crack the code on things folks haven't done before. Yeah.
And like Solana releasing a phone, right? Like, it's the same kind of a conversation, trying to do things people haven't done before.
Exactly. I mean, it's so funny. Like when you see the Solana phone, initially getting launched, I mean, I'm sure everybody has the same reaction, which is like, why are you creating a phone? Like, how many people are going to actually purchase this? For me, I kind of take a step back and I look at it and go like, what's the real objective behind this, right? And I'm not going to speak for Austin, but like part of me was, it's a proof of concept in mainstream, the normie world, of how a technology can get integrated into an existing technology and maybe create new use cases or new benefits. And I would say it's hard for me to believe that, major hardware providers don't look at that and at least say, yeah, maybe we should go look into this blockchain stuff a little bit more, or maybe we should go look into Solana, or maybe we should go look into competitors of Solana. So I think even just by doing things like that, it can create a bit of conversation and a bit of exploration that, just wouldn't normally happen on its own, or even if it did happen on its own in probably a much longer timeline. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're a degen, right? Like you're bridging both of these worlds. So I'm kind of curious from a degen's perspective, who has experience in Hollywood. Like, how is like crypto and blockchain disrupting Hollywood? Like, what are you kind of seeing on how that industry is going to be developed over time with this new technology?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's interesting. Like I grew up in Hollywood. As most folks that know that grew up in Hollywood, like this industry is not accessible, right? It doesn't live on LinkedIn. There's I think just a bit of what I would call this scarcity mentality, and this started like pre-social media, but it was basically that idea of, if you as a talent, and by the way, talent expands beyond celebrity actors. I mean, it can be a director, it can be a video game creator, but there was always this notion of scarcity. If we put you out there too much, if you're too accessible, that is going to devalue you and potentially devalue your career. So I remember, for example, literally, meetings that I was in back in the day with like Biz Stone at Twitter or Randy Zuckerberg at Facebook, and the biggest concern, honestly, at the time was giving people too much access. Right? It was, if we give everyday people this much access and this much exposure, like how is that going to impact this celebrity's revenue stream or this celebrity's offers from a studio? So I think it's important to understand that. So when I look at this space in general, I think Hollywood in general definitely operates in a bit of a state of fear. And I think where this comes from, honestly, is you go back to kind of the early Napster days and you look at the impact that had at the time, on the music industry. And I think, anyone that lived through that remembers that. And it's just one of those things where it's like tread carefully, So one of the biggest issues I find with Hollywood is that usually instead of finding like functional experts, so for example, let's hire Austin. There's a lot of times what I would call like the person who's closest to it. So, for example, I remember, when I was working with social media companies, all of a sudden influencers became a whole new thing. And the question was, well, who represents the influencers? So at the time it was the digital person. But does the digital person understand influencers? Do they understand influencer marketing? Do they understand direct to consumer revenue streams? Like they might not. And chances are they don't. And so I think, one of the challenges with Hollywood a lot of times is the person who's in control, the person who's making decisions, is just not as educated as they need to be because, again, they don't come from that industry. I think you're starting to see a little bit of a shift there where, folks in Hollywood are starting to bring in, functional experts versus like this person grew up at the company for 10 years and, they have the right to become this new kind of head of blockchain. But I think like what happens is because, again, sometimes you have the blind leading the blind. It's a conversation of, who do I already know? Who do I already trust? Because it's such a relationship-based industry. And then the question just becomes like, does that person really know what they're doing? And so a lot of times when I see, for example, big blockchain announcements in Hollywood, I shake my head because I'm like, this is the wrong partner for you. This is the wrong blockchain for you for various reasons. But again, like, I don't think that they have someone guiding them in the right way or pointing them in the right direction. And usually what happens over time is, a big entertainment company makes a big fumble and then they course correct. And then once someone basically figures it out, it is very much like a copycat industry. It's like they did this was effective, this was successful, and then everyone else goes, okay, what's our version of that? Or okay, how are we going to now execute against that? But I would say there's always a little bit of fear to be first because a lot of times, being first isn't successful.
Yeah, it's funny to watch how the Hollywood like portrays crypto. Like there's that movie called Crypto, which was super dramatic and like, like it's these like criminals, and it's just kind of insane to see. Like, do you kind of see like maybe like the tickets in Hollywood like being the first kind of adoption, maybe like the ticket technology and how like it goes for movies and whatnot. You kind of see that maybe being a first step for them.
Yeah. I mean, listen, like you can look at the Ticketmaster stuff that's happening right now. I mean, I think it makes total sense. I think at the end of the day, like anything the industry can do to prevent, scalping or resales that they're not being a part of, they're going to try to figure that out, right? So I do think, to your point, like I do think ticketing is coming in a big way. I think a lot of folks in entertainment, celebrities included, and I still talk to a lot of my old clients from back in the day. I think a lot of them are thinking about it from a standpoint of, okay, what is, how does this apply to a fan club model? But that being said, the fan club model has existed for years. So I think there's always a bit of a question of like, is this worth it? What risk do I create for myself on the back end? Because again, a lot of traditional entertainment folks are very, very precious about their brand for obvious reasons, right? One of the things that I actually find really interesting, and I don't know if this is kind of common knowledge, is you have in Hollywood what's called like above the line and below the line. And above the line is, actors, producers, directors, et cetera. Below the line can be everyone from boom mic operators to set decorators, things like that. What I find in LA, which is where I live, is a lot of the below the line folks, a lot of the folks that really kind of make Hollywood run, are very, very interested and passionate in crypto, right? And so I've now heard multiple times from pretty big like names, some traditional actors, some producers, directors. They'll come to me and say like, "Hey, I'm really interested in crypto. I'm curious if you know much about these companies or much about this technology, or could you take this very complex subject and just explain it to me in a way that I can understand?" And I always ask them, I'm like, I'm very curious, like what was your onboarding, like how did you get interested? And a lot of times they say to me, it was someone working on their film, it was someone working on their TV show, below the line in one of these kind of more production oriented roles that basically showed it to them in a break or showed it to them during lunch, and then they got excited about it. And then I think for Hollywood, when folks realize how much potential there is, I mean, you have to remember these are creators, these are artists. It's just their medium is different, the distribution is different. But I think just like all of us, they get just as passionate and excited about the possibility and potential as we do. And not to name names or leak anything, but like I had a call last week with a pretty prolific, Hollywood person. And he was like, I just want to bounce this idea off of you. And then about 30, 40 minutes later, we basically had an entire roadmap for an entirely new blockchain company. So that's the thing. It's like, I think there's a lot of possibility and potential. I think the problem right now is there's a lot of folks that just don't understand it. It is very technical. And then I think even more so, there's just not enough people out there right now to hold hands and to guide folks in the right way. But obviously, that comes with time and experience. So, yeah.
Yeah, what do you think about, because we had a lot of celebrities promoting crypto last bull market, right?
Yeah.
Tom Brady, Shaq. Like, do you kind of think that they're going to be a little more hesitant to throw their name behind a crypto organization in the future, or is that kind of just like, hey, like you guys are first movers, sometimes you get burned? Like, what do you kind of think the celebrity mindset is toward like crypto promotions right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I used to do a lot of those deals and partnerships back in the day. So we in Hollywood we call them commercial endorsements. You're going to be the face of Pepsi, you're going to be the face of Coke, and I think when you look at, let's just call it the world of like endorsements, paid appearances, usage of likeness and name, etc. A lot of times it's a very simple process. It's what's the term, how long is this going to last? What's the category exclusivity? How do I get this as narrow as possible? What regions does this live against, which channels is it marketed against? And for the most part, when you think about commercial endorsements, they're actually pretty good quick turn money making opportunities for a lot of celebrities, right? What I think's been interesting over time is how that world has really changed and evolved. And some of the best examples I can point to are like when you go back to kind of the 50 cent vitamin water deal. One of my clients back in the day was Ashton Kutcher, and he's very savvy. I mean, he was hobnobbing with Silicon Valley before most folks in Hollywood were. He was building his own kind of investment firm at the time. But I just remember in general, most of the time, folks were just looking for these quick turn deals. And then I think after the 50 cent vitamin water thing happened, a lot of big names started to say, should I create my own brand? Or, hey, liquor company, rather than getting a paycheck for $1 million, I'd like, a percentage of ownership in this new brand that you're launching, things like that. So I think a lot of folks shifted from maybe like renters to owners, if that makes sense. So when I look at this space, it's really not that different from traditional endorsement deals. It's, I'm sure, FTX probably hired, or whoever it was, hired a commercial endorsements agency. Those folks reach out to the right people at all the talent agencies. It probably starts as, what's the category? What's the term? Blah, 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 blah. And I think, again, like one of the challenges is with the lack of regulation, there's just not a lack of clarity. I think like one of the things that I would say, had I been in the position of maybe some of the folks that brokered those deals, is I would have said to my celebrity clients and obviously whoever was promoting it, listen, we're going to have to disclose this. We can't pretend like this is a as an organic endorsement, because that's one of those things that regardless of the category, it doesn't matter if it's crypto or toothpaste. If you don't disclose the fact that you're paid to shill in a second, in a sense, you're going to get yourself in trouble eventually. So I don't think like crypto's dead in the water from a celebrity endorsement perspective. Like case in point, Tom Brady. There are folks like Tom Brady, The Rock, Justin Bieber. These are some of the folks that I worked with back in the day. Not Tom Brady though, but that really think of themselves as business people that are building kind of 360 businesses. And I think like a lot of the folks that I still talk to are very much exploring this stuff. I think what we'll probably end up seeing more than kind of celebrity endorsements is celebrity investors, celebrity co-founders, or even their, let's call it like shell company, which usually is a production company involved in some sort of meaningful way. So I think, we may see less of them in a sense using their name and likeness. I don't personally think that the interest has gone away. If anything, I think more and more folks I talk to in Hollywood are really interested in it because they see the possibility and potential. They see the liquidity behind it. They see the global, I guess, openness of where things are going. And again, like they don't want to get left behind, Yeah.
Nothing more bullish than a celebrity endorsing an NFT project or dropping their own. Celebrity NFT projects, man. Holy shit! I'm like ready to invest anytime I see that. If Soulja Boy was out here, dropping some fire art, man. Like if you're here for the art, holy smokes, dude, that shit was fucking crazy. I do kind of want to ask you, like you also were chief marketing officer at Arbitrum.
Yeah.
You kind of helped them grow into one of the largest, most thriving communities in a bear market. Can you kind of like talk about like what that was like trying to build that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the joke that I used to always play with the Arbonauts, which I still like, was like we were the original Build in a Bear workshop. But yeah, I mean, I think like listen, some of what Austin said kind of rings true. I think there's a couple of things I would call out. One, and I'll use the proper terms here. Arbitrum is obviously a home for builders, but builders understand the value of a bear market. They understand that like a bear market is one of the best times to build. There's less distraction, there's less noise. So I think part of it is that community is obviously very builder oriented. Two, I really, and again, like this isn't even a crypto thing for me. When you think about marketing in general, most marketing that you've probably seen in your lifetime is what's called forced exposure, right? You're choosing to watch this television show. The next thing you know, you're seeing an ad. You didn't really opt into that ad. There's a good chance that ad has nothing to do with you, and you're not the right target. But as a result of that company buying out that media spot, you're being forced exposed to it, right? I don't really believe in forced exposure. I think it's a bad form of marketing. I understand why people do it, but it's really just not how I operate. I believe in what's called like an opt-in marketing, which is more. Let's take the example that I gave you. You know, you're watching a television show. Let's say it's the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. You know, that means you like Jimmy, you like the Tonight Show, right? So rather than my forcing you to watch some ad that has nothing to do with Jimmy, nothing to do with the Tonight Show, and nothing to do with you, how do I work to create something that actually connects those dots so that what you've opted into, which is the Tonight Show, is closer to what I'm trying to, you know, promote in front of you, right? And I think like this is where a lot of marketers just miss the mark. Like I know for a fact I was the first to ever put brands into Netflix original programming because at CAA we were creating that programming, right? And you know the biggest thing that I was doing on shows like Bloodline was saying, okay, well, what makes sense, right? That show's filmed in the South. You know, I can't speak to it today, but at the time, like Bud was the king of the South, so it was like there's clearly an organic fit for Budweiser in a lot of those scenes, and no one's going to feel like this is out of place or this is forced upon them. But I think in general, like when you think about, kind of what I was doing over at Arbitrum with that community, it was exactly that. It was, how do I take community members that are passionate? How do I build their own platforms? How do I help people launch their own spaces? How do I take community members that, have full-time jobs that they honestly hate, and help them become actual members of project teams in the community? So I think in general, like maybe the best way to position it is rather than thinking of Arbitrum community members as customers, I really always thought of them as partners and peers. And then as a result, it was like, well, now how would I approach my partners and peers versus a customer mindset, if that makes sense? I actually see a lot of them in the crowd here, so I'm sure they can jump up and provide their own POV. But that's a little bit of mine, I guess.
I love that. And also, like, are we in like layer 2 season, would you say? Like, a little pricey sometimes. Where do you kind of see L2s like in the future moving forward?
Listen, I'm not going to speculate on any of that stuff. I mean, I think like I'll just give you kind of my basic personal life like example. You can probably tell by my PFP, like I like Treasure quite a bit. I own a lot of Treasure NFTs. And anyone that's into like gaming and GameFi, I mean, you're making like daily transactions, whether that's scooping up the points that you've earned, or restaking your NFT, or questing again, or whatever that is. And I'll be honest with you, like I don't love paying Ethereum gas fees, and they've continued to get greater and greater. And once you start to build on a layer 2, which I do think things like social and gaming are kind of the perfect use cases there. Even for me as a consumer, I look at like the amount I'm having to spend on gas fees a month, doing these activities on layer 2 is layer 1, and it's pretty significant, right? So I think that means one, more adoption. Two, and I think this is so important, like more inclusion and accessibility, right? Because those gas fees, for you living in the US may seem like a small amount, but for someone in another country, that might be a pretty meaningful amount of money, right? So how do you plan on onboarding folks from that country if the price point on gas fees is just making it inaccessible? So anyways, I won't go as far as to speculate in any way, but I think like the use case for L2s is pretty apparent. And I think, as we know, as more and more adoption occurs, gas prices will continue to go up. I think like one of the areas that I'm personally just very interested and fascinated in is this whole notion of layer 3s and app chains, because really what that means is, let's take Yuga as an example, ApeCoin. If ApeCoin builds, as a layer 3, it gives them, more control over their own governance, more control over their own tokenomics, more control over gas usage. But I do think long term we're going to see a lot of companies, especially like Web2 companies, building their own layer 3s. So yeah.
Andrew, how many layers are we going to see? We're going to see how deep is this going to go?
Probably about, I'd say 420. No, I don't know. I don't know that. I'm the last person to guess on that.
Hear about L2s, motherfuckers are talking about L3s, and then the second I know about L4s, it's kind of crazy. But I respect the grind that this space has, but it's hard to stay relevant, man. It's like
it is, yeah, it is. I think like Austin hit the nail on the head. There's a couple of podcasts that I've done. I think one was with Blockmates and one was with like Web3 Academy, where I talk about this whole notion of like twisted truths, which just honestly for me drive me crazy. I mean, it's like if you're in white paper development phase, if you're in pre-alpha phase, like just stop with the press releases. I mean, I think the problem there is like it creates speculation, it creates hype. And I understand why as a company you might want to do that. But I just think from a consumer standpoint, it's really misleading. And I think if anything, it degrades your trust. It's a little bit of like, the boy who cried wolf story. It's like, after you've done 10 pre-alpha announcements in 1 year and those things never come to fruition, like who's going to believe announcement number 11? You know what I mean? So I think the reason I bring this up is, one of the things I'm always kind of hearing or people are asking me is like, what's the narrative, right? And so everyone's seeing like real world assets right now on the timeline. But like, what I don't love is when a lot of, companies in the space just say, okay, that's the new narrative. We need to jump on that. What's our RWA play? Like, no, stay true to who you are, stay true to why you came to this space, stay true to what you're building. If there's applicable use cases for those narratives in what you're doing, like great, awesome, like more adoption. But like, don't just try to jump on the narrative bandwagon and leverage that for your own kind of engagement and benefit, because at the end of the day, like it's just going to hurt your customers if it's not factual.
100%. And we have been going for about an hour, so I'll ask you one more question, and then I will return to your busy schedule. I can't even imagine what that's like. What the Ryan Reynolds memes? I see those all the time. Like, are you Ryan related? Are you twins? Like, what's kind of going on with that?
Gosh, I wish I could bring up a community member right now. I'm trying to remember how this started. It was definitely an Arbitrum community member. So I think one of the things you probably notice is like I just don't take myself too seriously. I think, and especially like going back to my Web 2 days, I think most marketers, they take themselves too seriously. They take their brands too seriously. Listen, there's always a line. Like you don't want to cross that line, but I think at the end of the day, like, anyone who's native to crypto can smell a normie from a mile away, right? And I think also for me, when I was entering, I wasn't ultra native. I mean, I had a passion for it. I was interested in it. But I said to myself, like, okay, if at the end of the day, like, this is my community that I'm trying to build, these are the people that I'm going to market to, like, I better be an active member of that. I better get to know these people. I better get to understand these people, because otherwise, I'm not going to understand how to reach them in a meaningful way that's going to really appeal to them and benefit them, right? And also just create stickiness and make them want to stay. So I would say I think the Ryan Reynolds thing was definitely a community member who saw, I think it was like my photo on a podcast, and then basically started taking my photo and putting it on all these different Ryan Reynolds bodies and using those as memes. And listen, I thought it was hilarious, so I just started retweeting it and leaning into it. But yeah, shout out to Arbinaut TBD. I can't remember who it was.
Hey man, that's not a bad person to be compared to. Honestly, Ryan's an absolute stud. Crushing it out here. So that's not too shabby at all. But look, we've been going for about an hour. This is brought to you by Hashflow, Basic Degenomics. We're on weekly. We've got DeFi Dad on tomorrow, which is going to be
Dad.
Andrew will be back tomorrow too. Andrew's about to be, being one of the best hosts in the game out here. Building up Basic Degenomics. So we're looking forward to that adventure. But Andrew, look, we appreciate your time. It was great to have Austin here earlier as well.
Yeah, he's great.
Have dope conversations like this, whatever market it is, bull, bear, whatever the hell you want to call
it. All right, thanks, buddy.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Appreciate you all tuning in. Again, this is brought to you by Hashflow. We will catch you guys tomorrow, 2 to 3 p.m. EST with DeFi Dad. All right, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Much love. Peace out.
Peace.